Look closely at the skin. A woman seated by a window, light moving across her shoulder in small strokes of pink and gold. No outline holds her in place. She seems to be made of the same air she's sitting in. This is the hand everyone knows. Soft, certain, at peace with itself. Years before he painted her, that hand belonged to a man who told his dealer in writing that he no longer knew how to paint. Not as a young man struggling to find his way, as Auguste Renoir, already famous, already called one of the men who invented a new way of seeing color. At the peak of it, he stopped, and a few years after he found his way back, he did it again. Twice, not once. He didn't lose confidence in a technique. He lost confidence in himself, in his own capacity to be trusted with the last decision he'd made. Not a story about a style, a story about a man who could not stay convinced. Limoges, 1854. A boy of 13 is handed a brush, a saucer of glaze, and someone else's drawing. His job is to copy it exactly, onto porcelain which does not forgive a wandering line. He is not permitted an opinion about the drawing. He is permitted precision. Nobody in that workshop calls this art. It's a trade his family chose because it would feed him. But it is the first thing he is ever praised for. The steadiness of a hand doing exactly what it's told. He will spend the rest of his life trying to find out what happens when that hand is finally allowed to decide for itself. The smell of wet clay and hot kilns. The clink of saucers stacked by the hundred. A rhythm of sound that never varies. Brush against porcelain. The same stroke. All day. A boy bends over a plate, painting a shepherdess he did not invent, in a style he did not choose.
He is good at this, almost frighteningly good. Fast, clean, exact. His employers notice.
Then the factory buys a machine that can print the same pattern in seconds. The boy's hand, the thing he was praised for, becomes overnight slower than a piece of equipment. He is let go at 17. He spends the years after doing more of the same. Fans, blinds, decorative panels for cafes, anything that will pay for lessons at an art school he cannot yet afford to attend properly. He is not chasing a revolution. He is chasing a trade that machines cannot take from him. What he takes from the porcelain years is not a style, it's a problem. How do you make a surface come alive without a hard line holding it together? Porcelain taught him that color, laid softly enough, doesn't need an edge to read a skin. He will spend the next 20 years turning that trick into a movement. By the 1870s, he's found his people. Monet, Sisley, Pissarro, painters as broke as he is, agreeing on almost nothing except one shared conviction. That a line drawn round a thing is a lie. Light doesn't respect outlines, neither should a painting. They call the result Impressionism, first as an insult, then as a name they keep. In 1876, Renoir paints an outdoor dance hall in Montmartre, sunlight falling through leaves onto a crowd of ordinary people, dappled, shifting, alive. Bal du Moulin de la Galette. No hard edges anywhere in it. It is, by every measure that matters to him, the porcelain problem finally solved. He is 35 years old. He has found his handwriting. He travels south, first to Algeria, chasing a different kind of light, then to Italy, which he had never seen. In Naples, he stands in front of Roman wall paintings buried under ash for 18 centuries. In Rome, he stands in front of Raphael. What he sees there is not more light, it's the opposite. Figures that hold their shape without dissolving, bodies with weight, with structure, with an authority his own paintings, for all their shimmer, don't have. He writes home that he's sick with the search, that he erases and erases again, that he feels, he says, like a schoolboy. A man who helped invent a movement is standing in a Roman gallery, doubting whether he can draw. Here is what he told his dealer, years later, about that year recorded in his dealer's memoir, close enough to Renoir's own words to stand as a direct account. About 1883, a kind of break occurred in my work. I had gone to the end of Impressionism, and I was reaching the conclusion that I didn't know how either to paint or draw. In a word, I was at a dead end. He didn't say he wanted something new. He said he didn't know how to paint. He does not simply adjust, he rebuilds from nothing. For 4 years, he works against very instinct that made him famous, pulling hard, deliberate outlines around every figure, painting flesh that looks less like light and more like porcelain again, cool, sculptural, fixed. This is not a stylistic adjustment. It is 4 years spent painting against his own hand's first instinct, line by line. The 4 years culminate in one enormous canvas, 3 monumental bathers, drawn with the hard clarity of a sculptor's chalk line, the largest, most labored-over work he had attempted in his career to that point. Contemporaries who saw it at the time called the figures cold, dry, unconvincing. It hangs today in a major museum, one of the most reproduced paintings of his late career. Here is the part almost never told. He believed in 1887 that he had solved it, that the hard line was the cure for the dissolving softness that had failed him. 3 years later, something changes again. Not another journey this time. No fresco, no ruin, no painter dead 4 centuries to point to. Just a man alone with 4 years of work, looking at it differently than he did the day he finished it. This time, there is no confession, no talk of dead ends, no admission of not knowing how to draw. He has simply gone back, soft edges, dissolving color, the very manner he spent 4 years disowning. He tells his dealer in a single practical line, the kind a man writes about a change of address, not a change of conviction. I have taken up again, never to abandon it, my old style, soft and light of touch. This is to give you some idea of my new and final manner of painting. He used it once before, about the style he has just walked away from. The third language is not a return to Impressionism. It borrows the soft edge back, but aims it somewhere new, toward Titian, toward Rubens, toward flesh that glows from within rather than dissolves into air. The news of the 1890s and 1900s are heavier, warmer, more insistent than anything he painted in the 1870s. His old colleague, Mary Cassatt, seeing them in 1913, wrote that the women in them had grown enormously fat, with very small heads. He keeps painting them for the rest of his life. In his 50s, rheumatoid arthritis begins locking his joints. By his 70s, he cannot close his hand around a brush without help. Someone else has to place it between his fingers each morning. This is usually where his story is told as a triumph over pain. It's true. It just isn't the important part. The important fact is smaller and stranger. A man whose body had stopped negotiating with him kept changing his mind about his own eye. Even with a brush bandaged into his hand, he was still reworking the third language, right up to the last canvases. In 1887, critics stood in front of his hard-edged bathers and called them a wrong turn, a talent gone cold. That painting now hangs behind glass in one of the most visited museums in the world, captioned as a pivotal statement in the artist's development. He was not a man who found his voice and spent a lifetime perfecting it. That is the version on the postcards. The real version, a man who found a voice, distrusted it, built a second one, distrusted that too, and built the third, the one that outlived him, not because he trusted it more than the other two, but because his hands gave out before his doubt did. At 13 in Limoges, he was praised for exactly one thing: a hand that never deviated from someone else's line. He spent the rest of his life deviating from his own, 3 times in 3 different directions, each one a fresh refusal to stay where the last decision had left him.